something and you have a passion for it, and you feel like, and what you want to do is pass that passion on, not show that passion off to someone. That's the key. If you want to pass your passion on, then whatever you want to do in the written, spoken, visual, or whatever medium, you have a huge qualification.
Passion can really be found through so many different ways in life. You know, whether that's work, hobbies, or elsewhere, I think passion can come through in every aspect of a person's day if you have the different outlook. And today's guest is definitely a passionate man. But firstly, welcome back to Down the Farm podcast, everybody, hosted by myself, Henry Carpenter. If it's your first time listening, welcome, and thank you very much for tuning in. This podcast is about bringing people from all walks of life down to the farm, my safe space, because I'm a farming lad from Herefordshire. I'm talking about very different aspects of life, journeys, adventures, all sorts. And today, obviously, we're talking about passions. Our today's guest is a person called Nigel Bradford. I first met Nigel like a family friends sort of pool party christening thing, quite weird to describe. Anyway, we bumped into each other as you're doing drinks, party chat, haha, and really started to just talk about different things we were passionate about. It only took us about half an hour to realise that we went to the same school and the same part of the school was in the same house and whatever, the colours, about 50 years apart. So we both share that passion, and we got talking about it for a while. So a couple of years down the line, Nigel and I have had a great relationship. We've both shared different aspects of life together, and he's also interviewed me, so it's now my turn to interview him. Nigel's been involved in Navy, aviation, classic cars, photography, all sorts of stuff, and all sorts of classic stories to tell that we hear in this podcast. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce my old friend now, Mr. Nigel Bradford, everybody. Nigel, I think it's the beauty of interviewing people like yourself is that I have quite a few range of guests that come on who basically are, are the TV presenters and everyone knows who they are, etc. And then you see somebody face to face. I usually like to use if somebody was in let's say the Co-op or Tesco or whatever, and you see somebody and you just bump into them and you don't have a clue who they are and you say, oh sorry, and you move around them, and there's so much history behind what they've done and who they are, and you never get to experience that because they're not some TV's personality. That's what I love about doing the podcast. So just to start off with it all, just introduce yourself a bit of your background, and then we'll go from the very beginning.
Right, well, my name is Nigel Bradford. When you and I met, you might have thought I was a journalist. I was the editor of Mog magazine, which is all about Morg and cars. I fell into that by default. Basically, all my working life was wrapped around aviation, most of it as an airline pilot. Initially, I joined the Royal Navy out of school with the fully intending to be a fleet air-on pilot. The Sea Harrier was just about to come online. We all knew it was coming. Funnily enough, the old Ark Royal was decommissioned. This is the real one with Phantoms and Buccaneers and Gannets and steam catapults and arrestor wires. That ship was decommissioned the week I joined the Royal Navy, so it seemed a pretty good time to join to be a fleet air-on pilot. Yeah, but so that didn't work out, and I ended up eventually becoming an airline pilot, but staying on in the Royal Naval Reserve. So I did both jobs for a long time. Retired from airline flying on my 60th birthday, or just before actually, and retired from the Royal Naval Reserve on my 50th birthday. I was always going to be a pilot. My dad was at sea, but I had no intention of joining the Navy. It's a rather funny thing. So Malvern College was, of course, a great place to learn, but develop one's own personality. I'm speaking like like a prospectus now. But
was that through the cadets? Do you think?
yeah, I mean, I could not wait to get into the RAF section of the CCF.
So just so the listeners know that it's a combined cadet force.
Yes.
So it's a thing that's offered to majority of schools around the country, which is
Yeah.
not necessarily. It's funded by the British government, or the there's I can't remember the exact name.
Government, basically funded by the MOD, by the Ministry of Defence, as far as I know.
And it's for juniors who are looking to come, and you start basically as a private, I suppose, and then the more senior you get, the more opportunities.
That's the primary role, but it also has a secondary role of helping people who will never go near the armed services at least have an understanding of what they're about and how they work. Now, I went into the RAF section. I was so proud to put on that beret with the RAF cat badge on it, because cadets outside the school CCF system, Combined Cadet Force system, were members of the ATC, and they had a silver ATC cat badge, Air Training Corps. But we had an RAF cat badge, so that made us a little bit more special.
Pretty cool, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was so proud of that. In fact, I wore a very old cat badge on my beret that had belonged to an uncle who was practically one of the founder members of the RAF just at the end of the First World War. The only drawback to that was, of course, it was brass and I had to polish it. Modern badges you don't need to polish, but I was so proud to put on that uniform, and I was such a nerd and an aviation nerd. My biggest thrill in those early days was to sit in an ancient Astra cinema on an RAF base down in Cornwall, and watch the Dam Busters on a Saturday night. Everyone else wanted to go out, but no, I was quite happy to watch the special showing of the Dam Busters, knowing that I was wearing the same uniform that all the guys in the film were wearing. That was a tremendous thrill. It was also a fantastic thrill, though, to be living on this base where people were... pilots were learning how to be fighter pilots. They were flying the Hunter, and I just thought it was so cool to be, look at these Hawker Hunters, which weren't frontline fighters anymore, but we were allowed in and out of them. The smell of aeroplanes, the feel of them. I mean, I was absolutely dead set on joining the RAF. I thought that was the coolest job one could ever have, and I can't remember a time when I didn't want to join the RAF, except I once told a friend of my grandfather's in Worcester, who was a policeman, because grandfather had been a special constable during the war, and this constable, long-serving constable, just said to me, "And now, young Nigel, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I just said, "A bank robber." And that was purely because I liked the stripy T-shirt and black mask that bank robbers in the Beano always wore. Never forget that. It was funny, during COVID, I actually got to achieve that ambition by going into the bank wearing a mask, but they gave me money which was my own. Yeah. So I wasn't exactly robbing it. But
police officer probably long gone by then.
Oh, long since gone. But the fact of the matter was, I was going to join the RAF, and of course the one thing about going to a school like Malvern is that there are schools careers officers from the three services who come around. So their job is a sort of a pre-selection process, and if they think you're suitable, they'll support your application to join their armed service, and they'll give you a little bit of coaching and help as to what you can expect when you go for the RAF Officer Careers Commissioning Board, whatever it's called it, but with the Navy it's the somewhat grandly titled Admiralty Interview Board, or AIB. I believe it's still called that, even though the Admiralty disappeared a long time ago. So this RAF officer sat me down in a housemaster's study, and it was the the study belonged to Mr. Chesterton, or Squadron Leader Chesterton, as he was in the RAF section. Bit of a hero of mine. George had flown bombers and transports during the Second World War, and then gone on after going to Oxford. He played, cricket for Worcestershire. I mean, that was the ultimate. This is a man who'd flown for the RAF and played cricket for Worcestershire. I mean, and to boot was a wonderful character. Anyway, I was sat in George's study. I think there was an aeroplane model in there because George was far better known for his cricket. And I was asked a simple question. What do you want to do in the RAF? Well, I'd like to be a pilot. And I stuttered a little bit. I still have a little stutter. You might hear it now and again in this podcast. And I stuttered a little bit. And this chap just looked at me and said, well, there are other careers available in the RAF. You could be a catering officer. I think I took that as a little bit of an insult, and the interview didn't go well. I can't remember too much about it. Anyway, the following week, I was talking to the Naval Schools liaison officer, who was far smarter and far better spoken than the crab, as I can call him now. And he said, so, young Nigel, what do you want to do in the Royal Navy? Well, I'd like to be a pilot. Oh, fine. And he just moved on to the next question. So I thought, hang on. This service sounds like they actually want me. So that was where it all changed. And then another liaison officer from the Fleet Air Arm came in specifically. He immediately apologised for not wearing uniform. Sorry, not wearing a uniform. Split the arse of the trousers the other day, so haven't got them fixed yet. Apparently, this was his line to everyone. He never bothered to wear a uniform. And then, not long after seeing him, I had a request, a summons, to go and see him in London, in his little office that was in Admiralty Arch, that wonderful building at the end of the Mall, the opposite end of the Mall from Buckingham Palace.
Quite smart.
And I had to go into a little side door that's actually in the right-hand arch as you walk from Buckingham Palace, so on the side of the old Admiralty building. And I walked in, and once again, he wasn't wearing uniform, and once again, he made the excuse of splitting his trousers. And he said to me, I like you. I think I'm going to give you a flying scholarship. And I thought, well, hang on. People get selected for this. He said, no, I want you to understand that I have 2 flying scholarships in my gift as the Fleet Air Arm Schools liaison officer, and you're getting one of them. But there's one condition. Oh, God, what was that? A condition? I had no idea what was coming. He said, I can give them to Sea Cadets and I can give them to Army Cadets, but you're in the RAF section of your CCF, aren't you? So you've got to join the Army.
Well,
I said, oh, well, I'd done what we used to call arduous training. I think they changed it actually during my time to adventure training because it was good. They didn't have to change any initials. AT was AT. It didn't matter what it stood for. And so, I went back, spoke to Trevor Southall, a remarkable guy. I believe he'd represented Great Britain. If not at the Olympics, he'd represented England at the Commonwealth Games. I don't know, but he'd been a remarkable athlete. And he was one fit guy. I mean, he was legendary. That he, up in the mountains, Trevor wouldn't stop. And it didn't surprise me that after I'd left, he actually went on to found the Royal Marine section of the CCF within Malvern College. He suddenly got the naval. Yeah, he got the naval bug, but decided he wanted.
I'm guessing the Marines didn't exist in that.
No. There had been a naval section which was run by Garnet Scott, who was the housemaster of Number 4, who I think I was kryptonite to Garnet Scott. I remember one end of term, he'd given me lines so I couldn't attend the house supper.
Oh, really?
I had to go and sit in his classroom in the pavilion, where all the maths classrooms were in those days, in the pavilion block, and write out the laws of rugby union, the offside law of rugby union. Little did he know that would be tremendously useful in my later life when I became a bit of a rugby coach. But yeah, in those days it was still 3 points for a try, or possibly just 4. So the game had changed. But Garnet Scott, no, horrible man. I'm sorry, I'm allowed to say that. But as I said, I think the feeling was totally mutual. But Trevor Southall was a guy. Southall. I never quite knew how to pronounce it, because he used to answer the phone saying, "Mr. Southall." And yet, in Worcester, there's a road very near to where I was living with my parents, in fact, where Mum still lives, called Southall Avenue. So that was Southall, don't know. Anyway, lovely guy. He ran the AT section. I went up to him and said, "Look, I've got to join the army for a term. Can I be an AT instructor?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "What a fantastic bloke." He didn't even think about it. He said, "Oh, you can keep your rank too. You'll still be a sergeant." So I thought, this is amazing. What a nice bloke. My opinion of him changed completely, because I was developing a mistrust of, even in those days, of people who excelled in individual sports as opposed to team sports. But Trevor had been at Malvern College long enough to know that the value of team sports and being a team player, and he wanted to help me. So I did. So I didn't do anything army, really. We just did, what, AT, I'm sure it still goes on. You just go into the Brecons, have a fantastic...
Yeah. It's good fun, because I can say, like, the one thing that I was at Malvern as well, for the listeners who don't know, and that's why we sort of know each other, other reasons.
Yeah, we were in the same house, but a long time apart.
40 years apart. But, so I think that the people and staff who are involved usually have been really good. I had a great experience for me. Yeah. I made a sergeant, but I used to dick around and just... that's all right. It was great fun. Like you say, you have opportunity.
Have I seen film of you dicking around?
Possibly, yeah. I was offered to host because I host a few things. Host the gun run, which was when they pulled the gun around and fire it. And I used to go and sell my sausages halfway through to extend the audience. I got really big bollocking for that. But apart from that, it was great fun. And just going out to Wales, like you say, and it was just, that was expeditions. I went to Seney Bridge usually. Yes. But it just, for me, I mean, I was actually asked if I could consider an army career because of my injury, and I listened to about my injury. I couldn't do that. But I think for someone like yourself who's going to go on and do something like that, it's great, and the people who run it, who are usually ex-military themselves, like you say.
Yes,
just giving you insight, and
it's interesting. I mean, to quote a famous old Malvernian by the name of Jeremy Paxman, in his autobiography, he described being taught by men who were broken by war. Now, that for me, that hurt when I read that. Yeah, men who were shaped by war, but not broken by it. They wouldn't be teachers otherwise. These were they'd all the wartime generation had all gone by the time you were there. But they shaped the college. I mean, George in particular. Yeah, as we got older, we understand that he'd lost his best friend, during the Arnhem operation during Market Garden. And George had survived purely because his aeroplane aeroplane was unserviceable. So he didn't fly. And then the Air Force realised they were about to lose one of their greatest cricketers. Yeah. So they put him on a transport aeroplane that was heading the other way, that wasn't heading towards war. It was heading down to Africa, and I think he crossed the Atlantic a couple of times. But yeah, so I ended up wearing the cap badge of the Worcestershire and Sherwood Foresters, and was very proud to do so. But the local regiment, and of course, having this flying scholarship in those days, that meant that you left that, if you could afford an extra 5 hours, because they gave you 30 hours, you had a private pilot's license, a private pilot's license.
Which is a lot harder to get hold of nowadays.
So yeah, I mean, nowadays a flying scholarship gets you airborne for about 15 hours, I think.
Yeah, so my friend's trained to be BA. Oh, he is on the BA course. He's not necessarily going to have a job at the end, but it's taken him, I think it was about 3 years just to get to the stage where you get considered to go on the course, and that's doing private license stuff or whatever. Because it's just nowadays health and safety is like, oh, you can't do this, can't do that, whereas back in your day, like, shove you in, Nigel, off you go, sort of thing. I know it's still very hard to achieve, but at the same time, I think health and safety probably was a bit less, and the amount of forms you had to fill out and stuff.
Yes.
But anyway, let's fast forward a bit. So
I left Malvern College with 7 A levels, which I would never have got. Sorry, did I say A? Oh, sorry. With 7 O levels, 1A, a fantastic memories, and a private pilot's license, which which basically set me up. It was most important because I left Malvern. I thought I was going to go straight to Dartmouth then, but because of the slight hiccup with the A levels, only getting 1 as opposed to 2, I was told, oh no, you can be a Fleet Air on entrant, but that'll be in March. So I had time to fill. I thought I was going to have a fantastic time. I was going to go and do things. And I went down, and on the 1st of September, I went down to the job centre. We all called it the Labour Exchange because that's what the building was. and signed on. And I thought I was going to get free money and have a fantastic time. And they said, no, we've got a job for you at the Inland Revenue. What? You want me to be a taxman? Yeah. A filing clerk. A clerical assistant. Ugh. Do you know what? Those sort of 3 months were probably the happiest, most fun 3 months I ever had, because yes, I was going to the tax office every day, which was at the other end of Worcester, near to where Waitrose is now, if you're local, and I learnt 3 things during my time working for the Inland Revenue. I hope you're ready for this. I learned how to drink at lunchtime because within a week I was a member of the lunchtime darts league. Yeah, 3 pints of lager and a couple of games of darts.
That's a hell of a lunch break, isn't it?
That's a hell of a lunch break. I was playing with the senior guys, but these were all guys who were sort of old boys of RGS and Kings. Yeah. They were all local, but they were all around 30, so I was having a fantastic time. The other thing I learned was avoid women that are probably 10 years older than yourself, because when you spend all your time in a dingy filing room, sometimes they find ridiculous excuses to come in and snog you. Thank God it was just snogging. Yeah, but that did happen. I suppose it might be called sexual abuse nowadays, but I quite enjoyed it. It literally was just snogging, dear listener, I assure you. So I learned how to kiss. But the other thing I learnt was how to fill in a timesheet, and that's really quite important, because the Inland Revenue were operating flexi time at the time, and that meant that you could manufacture days off, which included a fantastic visit to the motor show, where an old school friend of mine, one of the earlier ones at Birmingham, I suppose, an old friend of mine had managed to get hold, he hadn't manufactured, some trade tickets, so he went in on the trade day, and of course the guy that got the tickets, I'd never forget, I think it was a Bristol. He just leapt into this Bristol and found himself sat next to Prince Michael of Kent, which was rather funny. Yes, he crops up later in the story too. But lovely chap. But that's it, Inland Revenue, and then it was time to get on that train.
Exciting times.
Then it was time to get on that train and head down to Dartmouth.
It was almost, did you feel like it was almost Exciting, but then the fun time. I mean, definitely a different world sitting in and working as a labourer in Worcester and going for a couple of pints at lunchtime. Was it intense first couple of weeks, or was it?
It was very intense, but as a Fleet Air Arm half-term entry, there were only, I think it's 25, if that, may only been 20 of us that were there doing basic new entry routine, which means up at 6 o'clock and doing stupid early morning activities, EMAs, because everything within the Navy and Army and probably the Air Force is a TLA, a 3-letter abbreviation. So EMAs, rowing on the dart, running up and down the hill, bit of drill, a swim. Oh God, I can assure you that. Or gym. This is the gym that was famous for the fact that it's where the late Queen met her late husband. But I can assure you, it was no, it was no pleasure palace for us. The gym was awful. At least Malvern had prepared me reasonably well for that, but hadn't taught me how to climb a rope. And you were not going to pass out of Dartmouth if you couldn't climb a rope in those days. It was as many times as you could in 3 minutes, but you had to do it once. There were a few of us that just did it once and said, that's it, finish. I'm so glad it's not an Olympic sport anymore, because it's boring as hell. Apparently climbing a rope ceased to be an Olympic sport in 1920, but there you go. So, then it was quite funny. I'd been there for 2 weeks. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every fortnight of what, we did this, we did that. But I'd been there for 2 weeks, and I saw a signing up list for the college party going to Twickenham for the Army-Navy game. So me and a friend signed up. We were immediately summoned, the next day to, commander training. You are not allowed out of the college during your first 4 weeks. What on earth do you think you were doing signing up for that? I said, well, I understand we're allowed out of the college on college activities, sir. And surely this is a college activity. And I said, well, yes, I suppose you're right. Oh, right, then the pair of you can go. Make sure you go in civilian clothes, though, because all our civilian clothes have basically been locked away. So we had to go to our dig chief and explain we got commander training's permission to get out our dog robbers, which is what they call a sports jacket and slacks, or not jeans, definitely not jeans. And off we went to Twickenham for the Army-Navy game. Back in the day when it was still vaguely civilised. Nowadays, of course, it's an animal run, as the Navy would call it, and it's even more fun. But in those days, we took some of the college silver down and a couple of trestle tables with white tablecloths and set them up in the West car park as the officer in charge of rugby said, just so we can look down our noses at all those pongos eating out of their bag meals. What was absolutely brilliant was next to us was the crew of HMS Churchill, a nuclear submarine that had just come up from Chatham. They'd actually, in the West car park, which many of you will know, possibly still is, at that time was grass. This is 1979. They just dug a barbecue pit and were roasting a pig. It just...
You get away with it back then.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the West car park had seen anything quite like it before. No. Probably not since. But yes, I attended by the virtue of the fact that their bus was next to ours, a pig roast in the Western car park. Yeah, and it wasn't in a van. And they dug the pit. It was wonderful. And that they enjoyed some of our cucumber sandwiches too. I thought that was a great exchange.
I think being a young man and experiencing all of this must have just given you a great insight to crack on with training and
very much so.
Because if your experience was a lot different in the first couple of weeks, it might have just entailed you to not be so. And I think in any work experience you work in, as in the first couple of weeks, it's A, impressions, and B, I always think, like you said, you've obviously thrown yourself in here.
Yeah.
and the more you throw yourself in, the more you get to meet people like the HMS Churchill crew, and you get more experience.
Absolutely. And that, as you surmised, that was my first real experience of meeting real sailors in the flesh outside of the training environment. So, going to that game was important, and it was an eye-opener, because, of course, Dartmouth is teaching you to lead these guys. But in my day, and this sorry, I'm not going to say that again, but there's been a change, and they talk about that first section now of being military training. No, it was not. It was naval training. Military is separate. That's the army. Well, it is to me. And they were teaching us first and foremost to be naval officers. In other words, how to lead people, but importantly, how to handle boats, how to navigate ships, making sure we could swim. Doing nautical stuff, and that was important. We learnt the nautical stuff first, because that's what separates anyone in the Royal Navy from the other two services, that we are all first and foremost sailors, mariners. We learn seamanship, we learn nautical skills, and then how to fight comes later. Whereas nowadays, I think they tend to do a little bit of military training first, and I think it's great if you're going to have a homogenised single defence force, but I think Britain's bigger than that, and I think it's important that we keep the separate identities of our three services. Abolish the Royal Air Force by all means, and go back to the Royal Naval Air Service and the Army Air Corps. I say that's only slightly tongue-in-cheek. Yes, you can tell me in the Air Force have really gone on very well from that early moment, and of their kind offer to be a catering officer. No, I'm the sort of officer that wants to be at the receiving end of the catering, not actually provide it. So that was Dartmouth. It was first and foremost, Her Majesty's Seaside School for Sailors, and I absolutely loved it there. Again, I'd been well prepared. I went down for what they called the Scholars Camp when I was still at Malvern, in probably in between my two sixth form years. You just go down there for a week and have a fantastic time sailing and running around with guns a bit, but it was mainly nautical stuff. And you just think, God, they're going to pay me to come here, where all my other mates were going off to university, where they weren't being paid anything. As someone said, oh yeah, the rabbit warrens of university, yes. No, I was quite happy to go.
I think I loved
and miss out university. I was really happy to do that.
I think I loved, honestly, the experience I had when I was in Sunnybridge and stuff, and that was fairly similar, like you're saying, just going home and going through it. It's just a lack of social media and stuff as well. Yeah. I think in your day it's totally different, but in this day and age, I think for listeners who are parents as well, who are kids that sort of becoming early teen years, it's important to get either Scouts or something like that, something involved
absolutely.
Where social media is involved, because it literally was just the best fun, and you're literally isolated with these great mentors of grown-up people who are usually obviously ex-army if you're going down that route. Great life experience, and then just being with people and conversation skills, fitness. I know it sounds like a lot of people I spent 4 nights in a concrete room I shared with the other sergeant that was in charge, because eventually you get to sergeant and then that sort of level higher up, and captain level, whatever. It depends on which section you're in, whatever. But I think people might think you're mad for doing it, but it really is just a good experience. So we've had that, and then we've had your Dartmouth, and then obviously was there. How long was the training for Dartmouth? Is that sort of leading on to a next?
Very much so. It was leading on to a little bit of academic training after you've learnt how to be a sailor. You go straight into academic training, which is just making sure that you've got the necessary academic skills to go through to, in my case, initially aviation. And my downfall at that point was aviation mathematics, mental arithmetic. We were not allowed calculators, which had just become a thing at the end of the 70s. And that was how I managed to achieve some level of maths, because I think I must be, mathematically dyslexic perhaps. I don't know. I mean, I can do basic things, but moving on a bit, to work the manual pressurization on a Fokker Friendship, the first sort of sophisticated airliner that I flew. I'd flown the short 360 before that, but you couldn't call that sophisticated. It was a flying shed, and known as that. You had to have a working knowledge instantly of 3 times table to work out the rate of climb and descent of the cabin pressure. So I could never do that. So I just had the 3 times table written out on a piece of paper. So that worked fine. You would get around it. But of course, in the Sea Harrier, that wasn't going to be allowed. So me and the Navy parted company for a little bit. It just worked out nicely that just gave me time off to go to Wembley to watch West Ham United beat Arsenal in the 1980 Cup final. And then I sort of contacted the Navy and said, can I come back, please? I don't want to fly. I've given up all thoughts of that. And they took me back. That's the Navy. That's the Royal Navy. They are... you really do join a family. Or as someone once said when I was at Dartmouth, well done, you've just joined the best club in the world, but don't tell anyone else. Now, I see that is actually a recruiting slogan I saw for the Royal Navy. Join the best club in the world. I thought, my God, we weren't allowed to say that.
Or something,
we weren't allowed to say that when I was a youngster. But it
must be quite odd, just to lead on from that fact, it must be quite odd back then. Like you say, advertising didn't really exist for those sort of things back now, but you watch TV nowadays, the Navy is everywhere on TV. It
is. And do you know what? I'm really proud to see that. Yeah, it's a very modern Navy. Those new aircraft carriers are remarkable ships with their air wing embarked, to anyone that still thinks that we don't have any aircraft flying off them. They are remarkable ships. I'm lucky. Several of my reserve colleagues that I used to work with have been deployed on board, and they are fine ships. And you watch those things. And you watch the youngsters coming through. 1 or 2 of them, because we know that the film producers want the interesting ones. 1 or 2 youngsters that you see, you think, what on earth are you doing in the Navy? But they're making it work for them, and that's important. I always used to say that the best people in the Navy are the guys that understand, guys and girls now, sorry. I did marry a naval officer at one point. Female. They get it. That it's a role. You are acting a role. I mean, Shakespeare said that all the world's a stage, but a warship is particularly a stage. And you've all got your roles to play. The roles are defined, and they're defined by the Naval Discipline Act and ship standing orders and all sorts of things. But it's still a role to play. And I get the idea, I get the impression, looking at some of the TV stuff and still going back to naval bases for reunions occasionally, that you're allowed to step out of that role a bit more often than we were. And it's almost encouraged. And I like that because, to get a bit serious, if you're not allowed to do silly civilian things when you're actually in the armed services, I think you might forget what you're there for and which is to defend society. And if you're not allowed to just be in that society occasionally, if you're a full-time anchor-faced, as we used to say, so-and-so, who just doesn't enjoy the finer things in life and just lives for being within the armed services, you're probably not the right guy. I'd like to think I was a pioneer of that sort of attitude, but me and quite a few others. Otherwise, it would never have happened. But I like that about the armed services now, and they're still just as professional as we ever were when they have to be.
Yeah.
Society evolves. The armed services evolve with them. So I was there. It was actually quite funny when I went back the second time, because all of a sudden Prince Andrew was there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's obviously Prince Andrew of England, as in the Prince Andrew.
Yes.
It's quite an accolade.
The Duke of York. Yes.
And that would have been when he was be similar age to you, wouldn't he? Just to, roughly.
Yeah, actually he'd been there when I was there before, and there was a lovely story. Miss United Kingdom, Carolyn Seaward, a local girl, a local Devon girl. Our public relations officer decided it would be a good idea for Miss Great Britain, Carolyn Seaward, to come and visit her local naval college. We all thought that was a pretty good idea.
I bet every bloke in the whole thing thought it was a good idea.
Yeah, well, so come lunchtime, I know this is going to sound like a monstrous boast, but I assure you it's absolutely true. I walked her into lunch. She sat on my left-hand side, and a friend of mine was sat on her left-hand side, and I'm sat there and thinking, and I was slightly more concerned about getting spaghetti bolognese down the front of my white shirt when we first sat down, because that's what the main course was that day. Whether anyone had done research and found out that, Carolyn Seaward liked spaghetti bolognese, I've no idea, but we sat down in the senior gun room. And my friend on the left, while I was a bit sort of worried about how to, should I tuck my napkin into my
shaky hands
into my shirt collar or not, which is strictly no, but sometimes if you're wearing a white shirt and you're eating spaghetti bolognese is not a bad idea. Well, I was just wondering about that. He, on her other side, asked her to the end of term ball an invitation which she readily accepted. And I thought, oh,
you lucky soul.
Yeah, why didn't I think of that? I thought it was just an achievement to get her to come in and sit next to me for lunchtime. That was enough. Anyway, so this had happened. Anyway, news got back to me that evening that later on in her tour, I'd actually gone out in Stark Bay in a yacht, because that's what Dartmouth was all about. That at tea time, there was a sort of sporting tea time in the pavilion where Prince Andrew had finally shaken off the shackles of whatever shackles he was shaking off, because he hadn't met her all day. Went up to her and said, Miss Seaward, I think it would be a good idea if you were my guest at the end of term ball. I'm told that she blushed, and just didn't know what to say, because of course she'd already accepted another invitation, and the situation was saved completely by Commander T's wife. Yes, the wife of the same chap who told me I couldn't go to the Army-Navy game and then said I could. Who said, Prince Andrew, I think it would be a better idea if you didn't even go to the ball. That woman, I forget her name, but she has been, she has had legendary status in my life ever since. Possibly the first person to ever speak up to him. I think we'll leave Prince Andrew there.
Yeah.
But,
on the air, not so much more can be said, I don't think.
Exactly. But I can assure you that is true. As I said, I didn't actually hear it myself, but I was told it by several people that evening who'd been there. Yeah. The other thing that happened during that time at Dartmouth is I was bitten by John Noakes' dog Shep, but that he was out in a boat and I was just sort of hanging around as duty midshipman on the quay where all the boats sailed from, Sankey, and Shep was just there roaming around loose, and I went up to him and he bit my hand when I tried to pat him on the head. So, yeah.
So we go from Dartmouth, and then what's the next thing? What's where you've deployed somewhere? Or
No. Well, we go off in the training ship. We leave the college. Actually, there's a couple of good stories here, but I'll keep them brief. We go off in the training ship HMS Intrepid to the Caribbean. Dad at the time was captain of Canberra, the P&O liner, and he'd come down to Portsmouth to see me on board a couple of days before we sailed. Where he, being a reserve captain, I'd introduced him to the ship's captain, Peter Dingemans, who was a fantastic guy. And we were sailing a day before Canberra, and Canberra was going to overtake us. They were also heading to the Caribbean. And they arranged that we'd meet at sea.
Oh, really?
Which would be great fun.
Yeah.
And it was really quite... So I was getting quite excited about being able to wave at Dad across a very short piece of ocean. And then... So I turned in the night before the morning that it was meant to happen. And we suddenly... During the night, the ship started shaking itself. And I sort of wondered what was going on. So I went down to the training office, which was our point of contact with the ship, and said, what's going on? We're answering a distress call. We're pretty certain it's the Russians have put out a false distress call to see if we'd respond, because they'll have heard your radio conversation with your father yesterday, where I was allowed to give our estimated position the next morning. A warship never gives its permission. But we knew but Captain Dingemans had said to me before I went on the radio that the Russians know where we are. Look, they're following us. And they were pretty sure that a false distress signal had been put out, which is, let's face it, illegal. Very illegal, and the ship had gone up to a top speed of 22 knots. It was shaking herself apart, basically, to get to the scene of this sinking ship. Well, needless to say, nothing was found, and needless to say, Intrepid and Canberra didn't meet. Not until the following year in San Carlos Sound.
Oh, right.
In the Falklands, where I think Captain Dingemans and my dad did exchange. Did wave at each other, but I, by that time, wasn't there. I was becoming a flying instructor. So, yeah, I sort of regret that the ship that I'd known went to war, and by that time I'd left the Navy because I'd suddenly found out a roundabout way of getting into civil flying. And I was, it was great fun just being a naval officer. But when you've been looking out of the window since you were 5 at every aeroplane that flies over, or apparently living in London on the approach to Heathrow, lying in my pram, watching the aeroplanes go over, I just knew that I had to fly. And so I engineered my academic exams to leave Dartmouth. So I left and went into civil flying because you'll remember I had my private pilot's license.
So that was the end of your military career?
No, I joined reserve a little bit later on. Straight in. I was working as an airline pilot in Liverpool. I went down to HMS Eaglet, the reserve unit, and told them my history, wanting to join as an able seaman, just wanting to go in and keep my head down. And they found out that my father was a senior R&R officer and I'd been to Dartmouth, so I was straight in as a sub-lieutenant without any exams whatsoever. So
I bet you went, yeah.
Yeah, so best decision that HMS Eaglet ever made. First night sailing, because we used to have a minesweeper, mine hunter, with a sonar to search for ground mines. Sea mines, these are things that go boom, we could sweep the ones with the spikes on that you see in, TV films. Or we could use our sonar, which is, sound. I'm sure you all know what sonar is. It goes ping and then
waves.
Sound
waves, sorry.
Radar is radio waves.
That's it,
sonar is sound waves. The clue is in the R and the S. We used to call sonar as a nation ASDIC, during the Second World War. So if you watch The Cruel Sea, they'll be talking about Aztec, but if you've watched The Cruel Sea, and I recommend you do, it's a remarkably truthful film about the Battle of the Atlantic. You'll know what Aztec sonar sounds like. It goes ping and then it goes bing when you hear something. Otherwise, it just goes bing. That's a scene in the film. I'm sure you may or may not have seen it. Anyway, so that's it. And that probably blew Henry's microphone up. The squawking microphone. Yeah. Anyway, let's not go there. So we used to go to sea on Friday nights into the Irish Sea and do roughy-toughy things in our own little minesweeper, Hunter. HMS Brereton was replaced by a sweeper later on, HMS Ribble. But, so the first night, I don't know anyone, but I've joined as a qualified officer. I've got one gold ring on my shoulder. And I said, right, you're the junior officer, you're the forecastle officer, which basically means stand back, don't get in the way, let the leading hand or petty officer assigned as captain of the forecastle handle everything, take charge of everything, getting the mooring lines in, getting the anchor ready to drop just in case you need to stop suddenly. And we go down the dock system and out one of the locks into the Mersey and then out into the Irish Sea, all on a Friday night. These are guys that have worked a week. I've been flying an aeroplane for a week, but you rock up on a Friday night and go to sea. But we'd all be on board for about 1900, that's 7 o'clock in old money. And then we'd slip and proceed by 2100. That was always the idea, to just get the ship ready in 2 hours. So anyway, so we're proceeding down the dock system to the lock, more or less where the brand new Everton Stadium is now. And this guy comes up to me, this very well-spoken, able seaman, comes up to me and said, "Nige." Yeah. My immediate reaction was, "Nige, I'm sir to you." "Nige, you ain't seen me, right?" "All right, sir." And walks off. And I suddenly realised it was one of my best mates, Bones Britton, Dominic Britton, Bones, who left the Dartmouth in the most legendary circumstances. This is a guy who they suddenly found out had not passed out. He was away doing mine clearance and bomb disposal and blowing things up. So he knew how to blow things up. And they'd taken him back to Dartmouth just so he could pass his academic exams, my pitfall, and pass out. Now, like me, he decided that actually the Navy wasn't for him. He decided that he wanted to pursue an academic career, or at least do something else, because the Navy was stultifying, and he found it so constraining. But this is a man who knew how to blow things up. So he went to the college stables, because the college has a few horses, got a couple of bags of horse manure, and rigged them up around a very small charge, a very small demolition charge, which was wired up to the doorknob of his divisional officer, who he hated with a vengeance. And as I've said about a certain Malvern College master, the feeling was mutual. I was in the senior gunroom bar at lunchtime when Bones just came in to us. "Hello, Nige. I think I better say goodbye." I said, "Why?" And as he was about to say, "Yeah, I'm just going," we could hear this muffled explosion in the distance. And then there was a call over the broadcast, which in Dartmouth is never used, not like a ship. The ship's broadcast system, the tannoy within the college in my day was only ever used in an emergency. And it was Sub-Lieutenant Britton, Commander's Office. And that was the last I ever saw of him. Until that night, when he turned up on the forecastle of HMS Brereton as an able seaman R&R.
That's pretty cool, isn't it?
It was absolutely cool. He subsequently left the Navy and gone to Liverpool University, which I'm not quite sure what he's doing.
So this time you're being a civil pilot then?
Yeah.
So is that going into proper airline stuff or training?
At the time, I was what's called a pilot's assistant. This was the sneak job that I'd found, the sneaky way into the airline world that I'd found out about because a girlfriend of one of my pals was working as a pilot's assistant for Air UK. Now, this is on effectively a 14-seater aeroplane, Brazilian built, called a Bandeirante, which was under 5,700 kilos, so legally only needed one pilot. Now, we were flying airline schedules with this aeroplane, so the insurers wanted the idea of there being a safety pilot. So the company had a policy of recruiting people like me with a pilot's license who had worked, who actually had a dual rating on that private pilot's license to be the safety pilot. So we would sit in the right-hand seat, the co-pilot seat, for takeoff and landing. And as soon as and do the radio, because that was legal. And as soon as the aeroplane was into the cruise, we'd get out and serve the sandwiches to the passengers. So we were called a pilot's assistant, not a pilot, not the first officer, not the co-pilot.
You eventually did go into...
Oh, yes. And that was the important thing. That job, I did that job for about a year, ending up in Liverpool, joining the R&R. And eventually and so the other thing I was doing at weekends was flying as an instructor, because I got my flying instructor's rating, which I was doing at Shopton in Herefordshire. But I was also flying the jump ship for a parachute school up by Shrewsbury. So the thing was to build up 700 hours. That was the way into flying if you didn't want to do an approved course, which cost thousands and you needed sponsorship for. So I was getting my 700 hours, and I could log the time on the Bandeirante if ever it was empty, which it was occasionally. And so I eventually amassed 700 hours. I'd gone out to Alaska and flown a float plane for a couple of months for a friend of my dad's. That's another story entirely. I was the British bush pilot, that was great. Had to sing the Lumberjack song over the radio. Hey, Nige, yeah, is that you? Yeah. Do you know Monty Python? Yeah. Affirm. Can you sing the Lumberjack song? What, now? Over the radio? Yeah, all right. I stopped when I got to the bit about hanging around in bars. It was just, I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. So, yeah, that was fun. But, yeah, again, that was fun. So now it was time to become a pilot. A proper airline pilot. And the important thing about that was I'd been paid as a pilot's assistant reasonably well. I'd been paid to be a Royal Naval Reserve officer reasonably well. We didn't get paid for drill nights in those days, like going to the Scouts once a week, or should I say Sea Scouts. But we did get paid when we went to sea at weekends, and we did get paid for fortnights. And so I made sure that I did 3 fortnights before I went away to do my ground school for airline pilot, for my commercial pilot's license. And the beauty of that was that as soon as I got my license, as soon as I passed my ground school, did the flying tests, was that because I had worked for Air UK as a pilot's assistant, they gave me a job as a proper pilot straight away. I jumped the queue. It was fantastic. Really? Yeah, I was straight in, and that was.
It's not really different, as in I think.
No, I was doing exactly the same job. I just wasn't getting out of the seat in the cruise, which was fantastic.
And then did you work away? What airline were you working for?
Well, that was Air UK.
Oh, Air UK was it?
Yeah,
itself.
Yeah, Air UK was a great little airline in itself.
Does it still exist now? I didn't.
No, it was absorbed. We split after I'd been with Air UK for about 3 years. They decided that they were going to start a charter wing, which they called Air UK Leisure. So all of a sudden, I was stuck with a choice as a guy who'd been flying the turboprops, the shorts, and the Fokker Friendship. I had a choice. did I want to fly the 146, which is a little 4-engined 100-seater British aeroplane, or the 737? Well, for me, it was an absolute no-brainer. I wanted to fly a 737. Air UK were the only operator that I knew of for the 146. The 737, I mean, there's more of those flying anywhere else in the world. You know, so I wanted that on my licence in case I had to leave. Yeah, there's an irony there. I never left because AUK Leisure, it split. It became known as Leisure International when we went long haul with 767s. We were accused of operating the 767 to Florida as if it was a 146 going to Jersey. Well, I don't quite know what our accusers meant by that, because it's just two aeroplanes in a small airline flying over a piece of water. That method of operation worked. The method of rostering worked. And you ask anyone who had the joy of flying for Leisure International on that 767, that was the best airline job ever, because we flew from Manchester or Stansted occasionally at other airports to Orlando in Florida and Montego Bay. And the way the roster worked, you'd have 1 or 2 nights in Orlando. What's not to like? A free day to go and visit Disney World and do shopping and God knows what. It was fantastic. And then, by way of recovery, because we had to do it, you'd get 4 nights on the beach in Montego Bay. Absolutely fantastic. There's never been an airline job like it, and there won't be another one like it now. That was the best time because we were all together. Captain, co-pilot and 9 cabin crew.
And it's almost like just being back in reverse 20 years ago when you're back in your sort of army days, or I don't know if it's 20 years, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But, we're still saying that sort of relationship, everyone has their roles and so, but it's all a team effort.
Airline life is very, very structured. Yes, your life. I mean, I once had a friend in the Lamb and Flag, the well-known watering hole in Worcester that used to serve the best Guinness ever, and actually Guinness is still pretty good, even though everything's moved on from the days of dear old Don that ran it. And someone once asked him, "What's your take on life then?" And he just said, "Oh, I don't know, I just goes by me watch." Which was probably the best answer I'd ever had, because it meant everything and nothing. And the reason why I mentioned that was because I spent my entire 32 years of flying just going by my roster. The roster came out, it told me what I was doing, and then I would find stuff to do on my days off. I wouldn't let my wife find things for me to do on my days off.
This needs doing, that needs doing.
Yeah. Yes, of course that did happen.
That hedge needs recutting.
Yeah, but oh no, I'm far too tired. I need to go back to bed.
My 4 days on the beach are too exhausting.
Absolutely. Biggest mistake I ever made was taking my ex-wife on a trip to Orlando. She never looked at me quite the same.
Really?
Yes. Great fun. I was not a naughty boy. I was definitely not a naughty.
Are you just saying that for the podcast?
No. Oh God, no. Because I couldn't be a naughty boy because I had a girlfriend who was cabin crew, so that made sure that you weren't a naughty boy because she'd find out even if the wife didn't. The Royal Navy have the Saturday night toast is famously wives and sweethearts with the suffix of "may they never meet." Yeah, it's best that they don't.
So, I mean, we've covered literally most of your career. I'm guessing, how much further did you go on airline piloting? Was it?
I just carried on flying for 32 years. I mean, through mergers and mergers, yes. they were takeovers. I was always on the junior side of the two big mergers that we went through. Leisure went into Air 2000, and then Air 2000 became first choice, but then went in with, Thompson, the former Britannia. And yeah, as a result of that, always being a junior partner in a merger, one thing didn't change in my life. I stayed in the right-hand seat the whole time. I never became a captain. I sat in the left-hand seat in the cruise on the Dreamliner, on the 787, which was fine. And let's not go into politics and company politics, but there were a lot of company politics. A lot of management had their favourites that they needed to, who they wanted to reward with promotion. But I'm going to be brutally honest now. As a result of our merger with Britannia, or Thompson as it was at the time, TUI as it is now, I was put on a pay scale that I'd heard of from outside Britannia back in the day, which still existed, very senior first officers. And that meant that I was now paid a darn sight more money than a junior captain. Not only that, and listeners may hear the catch here, if I was promoted, I would go across at my seniority level. In other words, I would go from the top first officer salary to the top captain salary, if that ever happened. Well, I realised for the last 10 years of my life, just after of my airline life, just after the Thompson merger, that was never going to happen. It was too expensive. So I just kept my head down, flew. For a little while, I was the airline flight safety officer, which was a remarkable job, reading incident reports and reading them with a point of view strictly of how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I'd be interviewing captains who I knew and who knew me. Some of them were people who would sort of look at their roster and go, and then say to me when they were flying with me, Nigel, thank God I'm flying with you, because I know that we're going to have a good flight and nothing's going to go wrong, and if it does, we'll be fine. And so I was that rare beast in the modern world, albeit it finished six years ago, of a really experienced guy in the right-hand seat who didn't really want promotion because he knew it wasn't going to happen, because it would cost too much. And so, and I've had people say to me since I left the airline, yeah, I'm afraid that really was the case. So, well, yeah, I'm not stupid. I worked it out. I had the best airline job. I was being paid a captain's salary without the responsibility. And I'd like to say that I paid them back when everything failed at 30 West on the Dreamliner. All the automatics failed. We could still fly it. And we flew the aeroplane manually all the way back to Birmingham for the simple reason there was an absolute southerly gale blowing in the UK and across Ireland. So it happened in mid-Atlantic. There was no point in landing at Shannon because we couldn't, because it was blowing 40 knots across the runway at Shannon, which is the first airport that you come to when you're heading east. And because our failure was not listed anywhere in the manual, it was such a complex failure. It didn't say land as soon as possible, which certain failures do, like an engine failure. Land as soon as possible. Land ASAP. Yeah.
If the electrics went down, could you still radio the people saying they're gonna...
We still had the old HF radio, but the satellite systems went completely.
So you were just estimating?
We got them back.
Was it?
No. Funnily enough, the navigation system still worked. We still had the line to follow on the screen. It's just that the aeroplane...
That's good. So you weren't
the aeroplane wouldn't follow it itself. So I just wound it down to the smallest scale, which is 10 miles, and just hand flew the aeroplane symbol so it stayed on the magenta line. And that got us back to Birmingham. And Birmingham, to the uninitiated, if I'm sure people have flown in and out of Birmingham and all sorts of UK airports and never given this a moment's thought. But of all UK airports, Birmingham's runway is the nearest to a north-south runway that the country has. We were, as I said, there was a southerly gale blowing over the UK that morning. So that's where we were going with, we didn't quite know what controls we'd got, except that they were working. So we didn't know what our crosswind limit was. So we went for the best option and we landed at Birmingham. And I thought the aeroplane was going to be grounded. I thought the 787 might be grounded. And I went home and went to bed. Drove home to Worcester, went to bed, woke up that afternoon to find out it had gone out on schedule back to Orlando.
That same plane?
That same plane, yeah. Guess what, dear listener? The 787, like every computerised thing, works just fine if you switch it all off, wait for a bit and switch it back on again. Everything works absolutely fine.
That's good.
Yes, it is good. But I was concerned at the time.
So, I mean, what a career. I mean, that's just... I mean, obviously, we're just scaling it. We haven't got enough time to go into detail. No. But one thing that I also wanted to base the podcast about, which when I first met you, because you're a very passionate chap, I must say, is your passions of photography and... A lot of listeners probably don't know yet, but also your Morgans and your old classic cars. Yeah. So where did that come from?
Well, I had some of your listeners, I hope, will know exactly the Matchbox car I'm talking about. I had a Matchbox model of yesteryear of a Bentley Speed 6, a blower Bentley, when I was about 6 or 7. And I remember talking to my grandfather, saying, this was my favourite car. I had all sorts of other cars, modern cars. Well, they're not modern now. This was the 1960s. But you take my point. This was a car that has a big high bonnet with louvers all the way down it. It's got side wheels and mud guards and God knows what. And this was, for me, this is how a car should look. And I remember asking my dear grandfather, who'd been working for the post office all his life, except doing his war work, reserve occupation, couldn't really do anything during the war apart from be a special constable and so forth. That's another story entirely. But I just asked him, because he was just learning to drive in a Mini just as he was coming up to retiring from the post office. I asked him, why aren't cars like this nowadays? And he just uttered the immortal lines, well, I know one car that still is like that. Oh, what's that? It's a Morgan. Oh, living in Worcester, I hadn't lived in Worcester for long. I moved there when I was 5. And I didn't know about Morgans. And so I'd always had an interest from that moment. And of course, Matchbox produced one when the Plus 8 came out in... Corgi Juniors produced one, which I've still got, which came out in 1968 of the Plus 8. And I just, thought this was the best. This was my favourite toy. I've still got it. And then I got sent to Malvern College, not very far away from the factory. And when I had my bike at school, I just used to cycle down to the factory, and then with a mate, we'd sort of go in occasionally. And Peter Morgan, there were no official tours in those days, but Peter Morgan, if he saw a couple of schoolboys, would go, come in lads, go and have a look, just don't get in anyone's way. And we'd do that, because Peter understood that we were the future customers, we were the future of the company. Well, he was right as far as I was concerned. And that was when my passion for Morgans came. And when I left airline flying just before my 60th birthday, because it was just time to go. I'd done a simulator ride at 5 o'clock in the morning, Saturday morning, and this is, I think, I just turned around to the guy who running the simulator. We used to go into the simulator every 6 months. Now it was every year. We do 3 days every year. And I just turned around to him and said, I don't want to do this anymore. I knew my pension was about to mature, so it was time to go. And I knew, actually, my pension was better than I thought it was. And here's the thing. I'd been told I'd have to change my pension if I stayed on. So many things were building up. And I just turned around. I said, I'll paraphrase. I don't want to do this anymore. You know what you can do with your job. And he said, well, you better go up to Manchester and talk to the boss. I said, I'd be delighted to. And I went up and I left on very good terms. But like that moment when I left the Navy and thought, what on earth do I do now? What's my best qualification, which was the private pilot's licence? It was, what on earth do I do now? Well, I was already writing a monthly column for Mog magazine. I realised that I wasn't bad at taking pictures. Now, if Miss Bridgen ever gets around to listening to this, photography in my day was very different to how it is at Malvern College now. My friend Neil probably got the first photography A-level at Malvern College. I think he's admitted that it was the second. But he had to do it as an extra. It wasn't a mainstream. It wasn't one of your choice. It wasn't in the curriculum. In wonderful far-sightedness, Malvern College had actually put a dark room into the Lindsay Arts Centre, which is still what the photography department use now. But I could take a picture. I always fancied myself as I had an eye for a photograph. But of course I'd grown up buying rolls of 35mm film. And of course if you're not a professional and you have to buy 35mm film, and I had just, back in the day, I bought my first Olympus camera at the duty-free US Army PX when I was on that Caribbean trip in HMS Intrepid. I bought my first proper camera then, and I developed, and I just loved going around taking pictures of things. And I suddenly thought, well, I can take pictures. I'm already published in a magazine. So these are the skills that I'm just going to take forward into my last career move. So that's it. And not long after that, Mog went bust. Someone else bought it. The guy that founded it was wanting to get it going again. And to cut a story very short, it's not quite this simple. After a hiatus of about 3 or 4 months, Mog came back, and after 2 editions of that, I was the editor. So yeah, it's a case of I felt I had an aptitude for it. The proof of the pudding was people still bought the magazine. I didn't pass any exams. I have no photographic qualification. I have no journalistic qualification.
But you're sat in...
I'm sat in the editor's seat. And I learnt very, very early on that if I told someone that I was just taking their photograph and I was taking pictures of their car, I didn't do the trackside stuff. We left that to the pros. But I used to love wandering around at race meetings, just papping people. And here's a tip: don't put on a photographer's tabard if you're just wandering around the paddock papping people, because then you'll get much better pictures. Don't worry, I never published anything embarrassing. And I used to go up to people when I'd taken the picture, because I got to know certainly the Morgan racing fraternity very, very well. And a lot of them are very good friends now. I would show them a picture and say, do you mind if I publish this? And they'd go, no. Oh, please do. And then one guy, after he'd had a particularly nasty off at Silverstone, just came up to me and said, Nigel, you're not going to publish the fact that I crashed, are you? Why? Because if my wife finds out that I crashed, I won't be able to race anymore. No, of course not. Of course not. So I learnt, journalistic discretion that way, basically. I was enjoying what I was doing, and I wanted people to enjoy what they were reading. And the highest accolade that I had was I had two, maybe more, but wives come up to me and say, of all my husband's car magazines, yours is the one that I read. And I thought, that's pretty special. May only be two. Well, it's only two that told me. And so I was happy, very happy with that. Other gents would say, I only read Octane and Mog. I thought, whoa, that's pretty good company to be in. So I was happy with that. And I've had a guy, I'm not going to name drop, but a very long published author of motor books, and he has been editor of Autocar at some point. Subscribed to Mog, and he rang me up once to offer one of his books to review, which I was delighted to take. And he said, I really like what you're doing with Mog. And I thought, ooh, I got a little tingle when he said that, because I thought, well, I must be doing something right. And that, it's crazy. I've been really proud of things that I've done over the years. But you're only as, any sportsman would say, you're only as good as your last match. And my last match was editing Mog and publishing stories, good stories, interest story, life stories. I used to say that if I can park a Morgan in front of it and take a picture of it, I can write about it and put it in the magazine. Or if that person's ridden in a Morgan, I can write about it. Or, as in your case, Henry, if Morgan adopts a charity, I can write about it.
That's how
because it's important to them. And yes, I know that we'd met beforehand, but that was how we really got acquainted, writing your excellent story. So what I'd say to anyone listening to this who, is looking for any sort of inspiration, if there is anything inspiring there, is don't be put off by thinking you need qualifications. You don't. I was only thinking this morning, John Bishop became an actor, quite a good one, just falling into it.
Yeah.
Through the,
he was like 30, 40 years old.
He was another guy who, when he gave up as a semi-pro and needed footballer and needed money, thought, what can I do? Well, I can tell funny stories. So for him, it was stand-up, and that led, and there's certainly no qualifications for stand-up. And so, yeah, if you like something and you have a passion for it, and you feel like, and what you want to do is pass that passion on, not show that passion off to someone. That's the key. If you want to pass your passion on, then whatever you want to do in the written, spoken, visual, or whatever medium, you have a huge qualification and you will do it. And I believe that anyone will can follow that. To go back to flying very, very briefly, back in the days of flight deck visits when people would come up and talk to the pilots on a flight, I had one captain that felt very, very strongly on the subject when someone would say to him, I always wanted to be a pilot when I was young. And Ed would just pause for a second, and if he was having a bad day, which was rare, but on more than one occasion, he would turn around and say, no, you didn't, because if you did, you'd be one. And I thought that was sound advice. No, sorry, Ed did not sound like that, but that's how we all impersonated him. One of the most lovely guys I ever flew with, and that's the thing.
Nigel, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a really interesting episode. I'd just like to say I'd like to title this episode about passions, because you've had such a life of adventure, I suppose, and there's still got plenty of it. You're still photographing. There's plenty of car shows and car meets. And
absolutely.
Ex-college cricket games, rugby games are still attending the rest of this year. And Worcester Warriors is coming back as well.
Worcester Warriors are coming back. Yes, there's going to be a special Morgan Day, 1909, the 19th of the 9th. Worcester Warriors are playing Bath. I mean, come on. But I'm just going to say one thing. Can I just finish with this? I was always told by my teachers to stop looking out of the windows when I was sat in class. Now, two of my schools, my infant school, my primary school, and Malvern College, built by Victorians. Now, you know, Henry, as well as I do, the thing about those Victorian schools is they are built so the pupils cannot look out of the windows when they're sat at their desks. Thing was, the Victorians didn't think about aeroplanes. And you can sit and look out of the windows and watch the aeroplanes fly by, which I did. And in my day, I've said it again, RRE at Malvern was massive. Aeroplanes were always flying over Malvern low for experimental purposes. And to any of my teachers who ever said, you'll never get a job just sitting, looking out of windows, oh yeah, that went well, didn't it?
What a man, what a legend, ladies and gentlemen. Honestly, I know it's a long episode, but it was well worth hearing some of the stories he had to tell, especially when he started bringing some of the Royals out and discussing a few classic stories with them.
It's also important to note this episode was recorded before the announcement of Prince Andrew losing his royal titles.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope it's taught you a bit more about passions and how to follow them. It's not as easy in life, obviously, to say go and follow passions. Things get in the way, life gets in the way, and it isn't as easy as me just saying go and follow your passion. But I think what Nigel has taught us is that you can work hard, but also be passionate on what you're focusing on achieving at the same time. And it does take time. It took him a lot of years. You know, we was talking about that episode, and that episode was spanned over a good 40, 50 years, and you probably wouldn't be able to tell because he's so passionate about each story, but he just enjoyed the journey nevertheless. So, whatever you're passionate about, like he said, go and do it. And remember to learn to show on your passions and not show off your passions. That's the best bit of advice I think Nigel gave us in the last couple of minutes of that episode, and to take away from this episode. Make sure you're enjoying it deep down and not just showing it off for other reasons that you shouldn't be doing. But hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Please follow us down the phone podcast on all social media platforms, and don't be afraid to listen to the other episodes out there, and tune in next week for another cracker of the guest. And as ever on the podcast, from us to you, don't be afraid to go down the pub and give your fellow mates a hug. Cheers for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.